Hey everyone, I'm Joshua Orro, the Mustang Prince, and welcome to Mustang Prince Orro Reports. Now, as we come close to the end of this year's Nightmare Month, I feel in the mood to look at a Frankenstein-themed movie. As we all know, Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, is one of the most classical horror stories of all time, thanks to the brilliant writing of Mary Shelley, and it also became one of the most classical horror movies ever made. And as I stated before, Frankenstein has influenced several other films like Reanimator, along with Weird Science, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, Edward Scissorhands, and of course Frankenweenie, which I've already blogged. Also, believe it or not, my friend Elliot Jones from Musical Theater Village has written songs for a stage musical adaptation of Frankenstein. However, thanks to a generous request from Jonathan Cohen, aka Jay's Watch, I'm going to look at a comedy version of this classical horror story, and the person responsible would be none other than the comedic genius Mel Brooks. Released on December 15th, 1974, the movie is Young Frankenstein. And now, let's get started. Respected medical lecturer Dr. Frederick Frankenstein learns that he has inherited his infamous grandfather's estate in Transylvania. Arriving at the castle, Dr. Frankenstein soon begins to recreate his grandfather's experiments with the help of his servants Igor, Inga, and the fearsome Frau Brüher. After he creates his own monster, new complications ensue with the arrival of the doctor's fiancée, Elizabeth. So, what are my thoughts? Well, let's just say that this movie is the funniest film that I've ever blogged this month. And I'm not joking, this is a really funny and enjoyable movie. And to further explain why I love the film, let's move on to Mustang notes. Mel Brooks and producer Michael Grushkov originally agreed a deal with Columbia Pictures, but unfortunately, Columbia wouldn't agree to a budget of more than $1.75 million, whereas Brooks wanted at least $2.3 million. Also, Columbia wasn't very happy making it in black and white, so Brooks and Grushkov instead went to 20th Century Fox for distribution after they agreed to a higher budget. Principal photography began on February 19, 1974 and wrapped up on May 3, 1974. To recreate the visual style of the old Universal horror films, Brooks shot the film in black and white, employed vintage-style opening credits, used wipes and irises for scene transitions, and even used the original Kenneth Strickfaden lab equipment from the 1931 Frankenstein film. Also to note, after the movie was released, it immediately became a critical favorite and a box office hit. In 2003, it was deemed culturally, historically, or authentically significant by the United States National Film Preservation Board, and it was selected for preservation in the Library of Congress National Film Registry. And it was later adapted by Mel Brooks and Thomas Meehan as a stage musical in 2007. Now, while Mel Brooks considers Young Frankenstein to be his finest, although not his funniest film as a writer and director respectively, I personally think it's a pretty interesting one, and I'm also glad that my best friend, Stephen James Smead, who currently lives in Arizona, introduced me to the movie during my high school age. And I have to admit, it's been a really long time since I last blogged a Mel Brooks movie. If you don't know what I mean, I previously blogged Spaceballs during the beginning of my 4th season back in 2016. Also, I find it kind of unusual that Mel Brooks doesn't appear on screen in a significant role, although he did record several voice parts and he portrayed a German villager in one short scene. Plus, Aside from the black and white filming and the original lab equipment, I like the scenes in Castle Transylvania, which used to belong to Dr. Victor Frankenstein, along with a few of the scenes in the Transylvanian village and the countryside. Plus, some of the most memorable and comedic moments in the movie, in my opinion, are the candle and secret passageway bookcase scene and that Putting on the Ritz dance number. Plus, I think the music by John Morris is very emotional and intimidating. In other words, it's very fitting to the Frankenstein theme. Also to note, not only is this movie based on Frankenstein, but it's also based on The Bride of Frankenstein from 1935, Son of Frankenstein from 1939, and The Ghost of Frankenstein in 1942. And that's all I got for Mustang notes. So let's move on to the cast. Our main character, Dr. Frederick Frankenstein, is played by the late, great Gene Wilder, whom was in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, along with Mel Brooks' Blazing Saddles and the original Producers movie from 1967. Also, Gene Wilder serves as the movie's co-screenwriter. Dr. Frederick Frankenstein is the grandson of the original Dr. Victor Frankenstein, and he tries hard not to follow in his grandfather's footsteps. But when he inherits his grandfather's castle in Transylvania, he must choose whether to go on or resume his grandfather's crazed experiments of bringing the dead back to life. To me, while Frederick starts out as a very serious physician, he wishes to put aside his family's sinister reputation, hence why he pronounces his last name as Frankenstein. Upon reluctantly resuming his grandfather's experiments, he slowly begins to turn into an eccentric mad scientist, wanting to achieve immortality. However, instead of showing regret and remorse for his creation, he wishes to save it and redeem his family's wrongful actions. Next we come to his assistant, Igor, played by the late Marty Feldman. This character is a descendant of Victor Frankenstein's former assistant, Igor. To me, Igor is very eccentric, sympathetic, and funny due to the way he bugs out his eyes, the way he talks, and the way he hunches over. Oh, fun fact, Marty Feldman added a comic twist to his character by deliberately swapping which side the hump on his back was located, which explains why Igor says, "What hump?" when Dr. Frankenstein asks him about it. Next up is Inga, played by Terry Garr, whom was in the Black Stallion films, Dumb and Dumber, Casper Meets Wendy, A Simple Wish, and Batman Beyond. Inga is a young woman in her mid-20s who, along with Igor, came to work as a personal assistant to Dr. Frankenstein. To me, Inga seems like a very beautiful character, and she seems to be the only person in this film who doesn't have a counterpart from either the original novel or any of its numerous screen adaptations. Also to note, though her name and accent would suggest that she is Swedish, she was living in Transylvania in the mid-1970s. Plus, I find it pretty funny and cute that Inga enjoys rolling around in a pile of hay. Next we come to Frankenstein's monster, played by the late Peter Boyle, whom was in Born to be Wild, the Santa Claus films, That Darn Cat from 1997, Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed, and The Cat Returns. As we all know, in the original novel, the monster was a human being made of sewn-together body parts whom was grave robbed by Dr. Victor Frankenstein and was brought back to life through electricity. In this movie, this monster was a recently executed criminal whom Frederick Frankenstein hopes to bring back with the brain of a deceased scientist and saint, Hans Delbruck. But because Igor dropped it due to him being startled by his own reflection, the monster was instead transplanted with an abnormal brain. Now to me, Peter Boyle's portrayal as the Frankenstein monster is pretty similar to the original monster due to him being sensitive, emotional, scared of fire, and being shunned by most of the local villagers. But in the end, Frederick decides to save him by transferring some of his stabilizing intellect to the creature in order to reason with the mob. Our next character is the intimidating housekeeper, Frau Blücher, played by the late Cloris Leachman, who sadly passed away last year. To me, Frau Blücher is not only intimidating, but she's also very laughable and psychotic. Plus, she's the one who lured Frederick to his grandfather's lab using the violin, and I found it very twisted that she's had a romantic relationship with Victor Frankenstein a long time ago. And I thought she was both stupid and insane for letting Frederick's monster run loose. Also, the most memorable but slightly annoying thing about her is whenever someone says Blücher, we hear a horse whinny. Why? Well, it's because her name is glue in German, and we must never say that word around a horse, trust me. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if this gag was the inspiration for a similar gag in The Boy Who Cried Werewolf Nickelodeon special from 2010, where we'd hear a werewolf howl whenever someone says Varkalak. Next we come to Frederick's fiancée, Elizabeth, played by the late Madeline Kahn, whom was in the 1986 My Little Pony movie, The Muppet Movie, Don Bluth's An American Tail, and Pixar's A Bug's Life. Now, it's kind of hard to talk about her since Elizabeth is not in too much of the movie, but all I can say is that she's a character who becomes the monster's bride due to his enormous Schwanstucker. And don't ask me what that is because it's too inappropriate for me to talk about, even in reality. Another character to talk about is Police Inspector Hans Wilhelm Friedrich Kemp, played by the late Kenneth Mars, who voiced King Triton in the first two Little Mermaid movies, Professor Screw Eyes in We're Back, A Dinosaur Story, and Grandpa Longneck in most of the Land Before Time franchise. In my opinion, Inspector Kemp is another memorable character in the movie, next to Igor, Inga, and Frau Blücher. I gotta stop that. Anyway, I think Kenneth Mars' acting as this character is absolutely awesome. For example, the way he talks makes me chuckle and smile, and the way he adjusts his arm is also pretty funny too. By the way, I think Kemp's arm gives him some slight character development, due to it being said that his arm was pulled off by the original Frankenstein monster years ago. And now on to my final words. Overall, Young Frankenstein is a really fun monster comedy, and it's got to be one of my favorite movies to watch during the Halloween season. The cinematography and filming makes a great tribute to the original. The story is cleverly written, it has wonderful and hilarious moments, and the acting is absolutely fantastic. Also, after watching this movie again, I hope someday I can see the stage musical, as well as my friend Elliot's version too. And I highly recommend this movie for everybody who loves Mel Brooks movies, or any other monster comedy out there. I give this movie a 94% out of 100. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to tune in for one more Halloween blog, and this one will be taking place in London. Mustang Power.